Well, let's say you had to wake up an hour or two earlier all of a sudden, whether it's for a new job or kids are going back to school, or maybe you just want to make it to that early morning Sunday church service. Well, how exactly do you shift your time that you wake up from later in the morning to earlier in the morning? Do you just get up earlier? I'm Dr. Andy Burkowski of ReLACS Health, and this week's topic is how to wake up earlier. There's actually a science behind this. As I've talked about in other videos, the biological clock, also called the circadian rhythm, is actually set by when we wake up, not by when we go to sleep. This includes all humans and most animals. If we wake up at the same time every day, our biological clock basically is established in a 24-hour cycle that matches light and darkness. And that's how we can sleep most efficiently with that level of consistency. So anytime you shift the time that you're waking up, it causes a disruption to the biological clock. So if your boss calls you in and you gotta suddenly start making meetings and wake up at 6 o'clock and you normally like to wake up at 8 a.m., well, waking up that extra 2 hours early is not something you should just do. The reason for this is that it's pretty dangerous and definitely not good for your health to suddenly wake up 2 hours early. The biological clock reaches its lowest point right around 2 hours before the time you normally wake up. So waking up 2 hours early could put you into a fog, and particularly if you're driving a vehicle, it could be quite dangerous because that force of the biological clock trying to keep you awake is not there. So what typically should be done is that you continuously wake up slightly earlier. Depends on how much time you have, but ideally you would want to set an alarm and wake up about 15 minutes earlier every 3 days. This would allow a gradual shift to your clock that would be very well adapted to over a longer period of time. Obviously, if you have to do it over the course of a week, you can't shift by 15 minutes every 3 days, but you just divide up the number of days and wake up proportionally earlier every time. The truth is you can't fall asleep before you're physically capable of doing it. For example, if you wake up every day at 7 a.m. and you need 7 hours of sleep, you suddenly can't start falling asleep at 10 p.m. unless you're really sleep deprived. You're probably going to fall asleep around 11:30 or midnight. So as you work your way back in terms of the time you wake up, your body will work its way back in terms of the time that you can fall asleep. Now, a couple of other tricks that may be helpful for this would be to get a high intensity blue wavelength light immediately after waking up for at least 30 minutes. In the summer, going outside and getting natural light would be the best idea. But if it's the middle of winter and it's 6 a.m., you're not going to find natural light. So getting an artificial source of high intensity blue wavelength light and having that in front of you or wearing it if it's a wearable light device will help the biological clock advance itself or shift earlier in the day. And that might help you to fall asleep earlier as well. Perhaps getting some moderate to high intensity exercise after waking up will help to shift the clock as well. Another tip would be to get into an earlier state of relaxation prior to your bedtime. So again, you need 7 hours of sleep. Maybe about 8 hours before the time you wake up, you start to get into your nighttime routine. And as soon as you get drowsy, then you go to bed. Once you feel you're ready to sleep. But simply just getting in bed 2 hours early is probably not going to work until you start waking up 2 hours early. The last tip, it could be something I typically don't recommend supplements for sleep, but this is one of the rare cases melatonin is actually proven to be helpful. If you're able to obtain a pharmacy grade form of melatonin, roughly 300 micrograms to 500 micrograms in general, this amount of melatonin can also help shift the clock earlier or advance the clock. So if this small amount of melatonin were taken about 5 hours before the usual time that one falls asleep, that could also really be helpful in the days leading up to a shift in your schedule. But again, this is something that you may want to discuss with a licensed medical professional because melatonin could have side effects and is not for everyone. But the next time school year rolls around, or you got that church service to attend, or you got a shift in your job where you got to get up earlier, think of these factors in terms of waking up earlier. Don't just suddenly set the alarm 2 hours early and hope that it works. Be prepared, plan in advance, and shift your wake up time earlier. As always, this video is for general medical information only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine. Please make all medical decisions under the guidance of a licensed medical provider. And as always, one of the keys to sleeping well is to relax.